Need a little music.
Hello, everybody. Welcome. Welcome. Thank you so much for joining us. We're just waiting for a few more people to enter the room, and then we will go ahead and get started. So make yourself at home. Sorry, that's a bad pun. Again, welcome everybody as you come in. We're just waiting a couple more minutes to let people roll in, and we will get started in just a few minutes here. So thanks so much for your patience, and thank you for joining us. Again, welcome everybody. If you've just joined us, we are just going to wait one more minute to make sure everybody gets into the room okay, and then we'll go ahead and get started. All right, let's go ahead and get started. Thank you all so much for coming and for tuning in today. My name is Amy Ellison, and I'm the exhibition curator at the Los Altos History Museum. We are so thrilled that you could join us this evening for a webinar on women in leadership with 4 absolutely incredible panelists who we will be introducing in just a minute. We are really excited to be able to offer this virtual event in connection with our current exhibition, Rise Up, the Fight for Women's Suffrage, which celebrates the centennial of the 19th Amendment this year in 2020, and honors the women leaders of many different races and backgrounds who fought for women's rights and voting rights both before 1920 and after. And due to the shelter in place, the museum is unfortunately, we are currently closed to the public, but when things are a bit safer, when we're able to open our doors again, we hope you'll be able to come back and check out the exhibit. It is scheduled to run through February 21st, and it is free to the public. And we're able to offer free exhibitions like Rise Up and free programs like this webinar because of our members and donors. So if you would like to become a museum member, please visit our website at losaltoshistory.org, and you can learn all about all the awesome perks of being a museum member. So please go and check out our website. So before I introduce our moderator, just a couple of quick housekeeping items. The webinar is being recorded, so if you want to watch it again, or if you want to pass it along to a friend who wasn't able to attend tonight, the recording will be available later this week on our website, where you can also see recordings of all of our previous programs, virtual programs this year. And I'd also like to encourage everyone to use the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen. You can write in comments, questions. Please do so throughout the discussion tonight. There's no need to wait till the end. Go ahead and write in your questions and comments, and at the end of the talk, we'll be able to get to your responses and have the panelists respond to them at the end of the night. So please go ahead and use that Q&A feature. We'd love to hear from you. Okay, so it is my great pleasure to welcome our moderator, Protima Pandey. She is the director for the Office of Women's Policy in Santa Clara County. As part of the county executive, her office works to bring a gender lens to policy decision-making, building a pipeline to leadership, and creating equity in governance. She is also part of the county's core race equity steering team, providing organizational assessment tools to all 41 county departments. Prior to that, Protima was the managing attorney and regional counsel for immigration at Bay Area Legal Aid, litigating on family law and immigration cases for survivors of domestic violence, as well as allied legal relief in areas of public benefits, housing preservation, and economic justice. In 2017, she won a precedent-setting case in California, Kumar versus Kumar, a complex immigration and family law crossover case. She also led the firm-wide postgraduate fellowship program to recruit and mentor future public interest lawyers. She was also one of 17 lawyers nationwide appointed as a commissioner to the American Bar Association Commission on Domestic and Sexual Violence to work on issues impacting delivery of legal services to survivors from 2015 to 2018, where she is also a litigation skills faculty. Protima is also an expert witness, guest faculty at Stanford Law, Berkeley Law, and UC Hastings Law, and she continues training lawyers nationally on understanding personal bias and working with diverse populations. Her public interest career began in Southern California, and prior to countywide public policy, she also led statewide public policy on gender-based violence prevention in Sacramento. So without any further ado, Protima, I will turn it over to you.
Wow. Thank you, Amy. I'm a little embarrassed now. That was too long a bio. So reminder, I'm going to have a 10-sentence bio next time. Welcome to everybody who has taken time out today to be with us. I know that in a pandemic year, and yes, that's a thing that should enter the dictionary now, pandemic year. I know that in a pandemic year, it is hard for us to even imagine that we can come together to commemorate or celebrate or honor. But I want us this evening to remember that we're commemorating how far women leaders have come. We are celebrating the resiliency and strength of all of our panelists and each one of you who decided to join us today. And we are honoring the journey that each of our panelists have taken so that we can be reminded of how we have to look around us each time we feel that the finish line keeps moving. Each time we feel that the peak or the summit is higher, each time we feel what more can there be as a curveball. Believe me, each one of us have within us the resiliency required. And all we need is a little motivation from those who are among us, who have walked the walk, fought the fight, and joined us today to share their journey. And before I begin to introduce our illustrious panel that I'm honored to be part of, I want to thank you, Amy, for reaching out to Office of Women's Policy to find a way to integrate our work that we have begun in 2018 on commemorating the centennial of the 19th Amendment. Office of Women's Policy has deliberately chosen to find participatory and civic democratic events and opportunities in order to ensure that we honor the bravery of those women who fought 100 years ago for some women to get the right to vote, because we know not all of us got the right to vote 100 years ago. And yet, if those brave women had not fought, had not said status quo is not okay, and had not said, what else do we need to do so you recognize one half of the population, none of us would have been able to be here today. And yet, there is a lot more to do. In a year when we celebrate and commemorate the 100th anniversary of women's right to vote, we also had a historic moment when we realized that now to the title of vice president will be responding a woman of color. It's a powerful image. And we all know that we can do so much more when we come together and support each other, to be strong for each other, and yet to remember that we need to move forward together. So Amy, I'm going to have you move to the next slide, because it is my great pleasure and my great honor to introduce tonight's speakers. I want to begin with Opuya Akiong, who's a San Francisco Bay Area native. She's a first-generation Samoan Chinese and the owner of Quabody Studios in Los Altos and Pleasanton. She's also a partner at VI LLC, and she's the founder of Women Entrepreneurs Launch. As one of the first massage therapists at Google many years ago, and that's all I'm going to say, she pioneered wellness at work settings. Imagine what would have happened if wellness at work had become a mantra. You are looking at one of our panelists who really has challenged why it isn't and worked to make it a mantra. She's inspired by a quote from Simon Sinek: leadership is not about being in charge. Leadership is about taking care of those in your charge. Welcome, Upuia. Then we have Dr. Marianne Dewan, who is the Santa Clara County Superintendent of Schools. She has served in education over 30 years in a variety of leadership roles. Dr. Dewan believes that all students deserve high quality, equitable, and inclusive education. She serves on a number of committees and boards and promotes equity-focused systems change at local, county, and state levels, and is recognized for her work in education reform, change leadership, and for her commitment to serve the community, the underserved, and vulnerable youth. She's passionate about diversity, inclusion, equity, and social justice. And I'm honored that we concluded one entire year of youth engagement workshops along with Dr. Dewan's team. I'm so blessed that we got a chance to work together, and I look forward to many more partnerships. Finally, we have the amazing Dolores Alvarado, who is the Executive Director of Community Health Partnership, which has worked for the last 25 years to improve health outcomes for our most vulnerable populations in Santa Clara. A recognized health services leader throughout the Bay Area and California, Dolores is known for her ability to bring together stakeholders of diverse communities and perspectives to address the root cause of health issues, such as poverty and lack of education. She strongly believes in the power of multidisciplinary health teams in program planning and delivery, and this belief is reflected in Community Health Partnership's efforts to improve health services throughout the County of Santa Clara. Office of Women's Policy also recently received a report that concluded the work CHP did in our community on health equity, and we hope to continue to grow our work on women, girls, and health outcomes with leaders such as Dolores. And so it is my honor that each one of you have agreed to take time out this evening. I know how crazy busy each of you are, but without any further delay, what I'd like to do is to start off by asking each one of you to share your leadership journey. And for me, the leadership journey really reflects, how did you come to where you are today? Was this always your dream job? And while you're thinking about your journey, who or what were some of the reasons that got you to where you are today? So we could begin with Upuia, please, and thank you.
Thank you so much, Amy and Dr. Protima, and the ladies on this panel for the opportunity to share about my journey and also to hear some of the amazing stories that will be um, displayed this evening. Again, honored to be part of this group in the centennial, this commemorative year of celebrating women in leadership and just what has happened over the last 100 years for women. So my journey really begins with um, my family and my culture. As Protima mentioned, I'm Samoan and Chinese, and my exposure to leadership begins with just growing up in a Samoan family that to be part of this type of culture, we work in community at all times. And I've learned as a young girl to be of service is a great value. To be a great leader, you must master the art of service. And I feel that as I grew up, I learned how to serve my grandparents, my parents, my aunts and uncles, and my family, and it has just transferred into me being a massage therapist, being in a leadership role at the school. My background is a school counselor, and I've just been in that position of learning how to give back to the people that I want to serve. And so I do think that to be a great leader or just to be a leader, you need to master the art of service. I live in Kua Body Studios. We work so closely together. We work together in decision making, in collaboration. With my new team, Vi, we just collaborated on another project, and it's very important to gain the opinions and the viewpoints of your teammates in order to really be successful. So I would say, in regards to your question, that service is so key and monumental in being a great leader. This helped me in my journey from a child. From my first job was just to mention was a paper route. I was about in 5th grade, and I took so much pride in serving my neighbors, those that were on my route. And from that point on, I just learned that strong work ethics, watching my mom and dad, who again are I'm first generation Samoan in the United States. So just watching them and their work ethics, working hard, multiple jobs to give me and my brothers and sisters the opportunity to advance. So thank you.
Yeah, no, thank you. And paper route, for those of you who don't know what a paper route is, you're too young. That's all I'm gonna say. But newspapers are a thing. They still are. Some of us still like to read actual newspapers. But thank you, Upuia, for sharing. And I've shared this when we were prepping for the panel. I'm honored that I'm on a panel with a Pacific Islander community member, because often when people say Asian Pacific Islander, I always find that gap. And thank you very much for joining us today and bringing your culture with us. We are who we are, culture and all. So I'm glad that we lead with that. So with that, I'll turn over to Dr. Dewan. I would love to hear about a little bit about your journey and specifically what, who, and how, and why. So please.
Well, thank you so much for having me tonight. It's just an honor to be here with all of these amazing women and to be a part of this community that cares about these leadership journeys that we've all been on. So I have to say my leadership journey began accidentally when I was 12 years old, and I got my first job. And through some gumption and maybe a little defiance of my parents, found a job at the local public library, putting books back on the shelf. And I learned through hard work and opportunity that there were, things that I could do and places that hard work might take me. When I was a little bit older, as a teenager, I was recruited into a fast food job position, and was one of the youngest managers in the history of the company. Became a manager of my own site at the age of 18, and probably would have stayed in business had I seen any other women in business leadership roles, but I didn't. And what I knew and what I saw was educators, was teachers. That was the community that I knew. And that's where my passion and my heart for service came from. And so I became a teacher, and that launched me after a number of years of teaching to be recruited into the principalship. And I was recruited into the principalship by my principal, who saw something in me and really believed that I had this opportunity to serve. And I remember quite distinctly resisting the invitation to join a leadership development program and to become a school principal because I didn't see other women in the principal role. And I didn't think I could lead the way that the principals I knew did. I was short, petite, soft voice, and, didn't have the same presence that I believed or understood that a man in the principal role would have. But with that encouragement and support, I began my official leadership journey as a school principal. And I didn't even know that a county superintendent existed all those years ago, but now all these years into work and into education, I'm really honored to be in the position of county superintendent because it assists me in fulfilling my passions and my obligation and sense of responsibility to community, to give back to young girls and boys like me, and ensure that there's opportunity for access and opportunity to, achieve in ways that I didn't even know were possible in my little neighborhood and little community many years ago.
Wow. I mean, thank you so much, Dr. Dewan, because a couple of things that you raised are very important for us. We consistently at the Office of Women's Policy have this mantra, if you can't be it, if you can't see it, you can't be it. And you demonstrated that how early on in your career. And I know Upuia has shared about how you started WELA, and we hope at some point in time, I'm going to ask you that follow-up too. Just finding ways to ensure that we look around us. And sometimes, as you did with your journey to being a principal, sometimes you just step in and you say, this is it, I'm not going to wait, I'm going to do this. And I really want to say thank you for sharing that, because for everyone on this panel and everyone who's joined us today, that part of the journey is also important to remember, that this is not a cookie cutter thing that someone builds for us and that we get to ride on. And of course, newspaper route and fast food, these are great careers to have early on when you're worried about where, right? So Dolores, take it away. Share us your journey.
But how can I follow a fast food manager, right?
Believe me, I know you can follow, so go.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you again to the Office of Women's Policy. Special thanks to the Los Altos Historical Museum. I do want to start by telling you that I have a special place in my heart for museums, and I spend hours wherever I go to visit museums. So this is probably the biggest reason why I said yes to you, Protima, because of who's sponsoring it. So thank you again. I'd like to tell you a little bit of what got me to this position, not so much from my professional roadmap, because my roadmap went all over the United States, almost literally, but more around what motivated me. Three to four major experiences in my life. One was when I was about 4 or 5 years old. I was living with my family on the Mexican side of the El Paso, Texas, El Paso Juarez border where I was born. And I would cross the border with my family on a daily basis, either to go to work with, with my mom, etc. And at that point, I was able to really notice and view and feel and watch people crossing the border, literally, and immigration either arresting them, pulling them off the road, or just watch them run across the border, to a point where I can tell you this now because my mother is no longer on this earth. She died 3 years ago, but at one point I helped her bring some family members in the trunk of our car across the border because they were literally starving to death. They really were, and they needed a job. So don't ask me, now that I think about it, I shudder to think that I helped in this illegal activity, so to speak, from a good place. So I remember admiring my mother for having the courage to do that. You know, and eventually we came to this country, we became citizens, etc. The second experience that I remember vividly is when we did come to this country. By then I was 10, and we landed in San Francisco, and my mom became very ill, and I became her interpreter, really just beginning to learn English. We hadn't been here more than probably 6, 7 months. And we ended up at UCSF, University of California, San Francisco, where I had to interpret while she was having a very personal exam. Turned out to be cancer, surgery, etc. And I did all the interpretation. But I'll tell you, and translation, but I will tell you that what comes from that, what I remember the most about that experience was not so much that the hospital didn't have interpreters, because, you know, I didn't know, I was 10 years old, but two things. One, that my mother had enough trust and faith in me that I would do the right thing, that I would respect her, because I always made sure that I stood behind her as she was having all the exams that she was having, and that I would keep it confidential, you know, and that I was competent enough to do that. I was very honored that she would ask me. She didn't ask her sisters-in-law, she asked her 10-year-old daughter. So I remember that. And that's when I fell in love with healthcare, just through that experience. But because I come from a family of teachers, I was destined to be a teacher. My parents said, you're going to college and you're going to become a teacher. And I've shared this with Dr. Dewan. I failed miserably at teaching. But what I did learn when I was teaching K through, I think it was K through 3, and of course, you know, young 22-year-old teacher giving her 4 grades in one, and bilingual, was not a very smart thing to do. However, I had the opportunity of meeting wonderful, wonderful parents. And the parents that I remember the most were young women between the ages of 18, so they were clearly had been teen moms, and maybe 23, 24, who had also were also living in very dangerous neighborhoods, but also lifestyles with heroin addiction, that kind of thing. But I remember that they inspired me because no matter what was on in their lives, they were at the school with their children. They would come to the meetings. They would do whatever they could in their power to help their children. And I thought, I started to compare that to the experience I had at the border, watching women and men, and particularly women, running across the border, running for their lives. Like, what motivates someone to, no matter how evil or how awful their life is, they survive? What is it that they have that perhaps I didn't think I had at the time? Make a long story short, that led me into working at a community health center in Oakland, East Oakland, then on to school. And lo and behold, I get a job at the General Hospital in East Oakland, California, at Highland General, and working as the social work case manager for women who were delivering babies who were addicted to cocaine at that point. By then it was the late 70s, early 80s. So it's like my life came, you know, it came together at that point. Healthcare, which is what I learned and loved, being an interpreter for my parents, um, all the way to advocating for women who were afflicted by this terrible disease or social environmental impact of the cocaine and the crack cocaine that had been dropped on the poor communities of East Oakland. So it all came together. It was really an incredible experience, you know, to just think through that. And the leadership that I think I learned, or the belief that I could in fact be of some assistance to women, came not just from my experiences, but by my boss, the head of the Department of Social Services, and her name is Deborah Holliday, wonderful woman, who said, you know, no one else here has any empathy for the women who are delivering babies shackled by the police, by the sheriffs. No one cares, and you need to go up there. You need to go up to the 9th floor. And I said to her, you know, but I'm like in my late 20s. I was very, very young. I had no children. I wasn't married. And she was right. She was right. They responded. So that's my story of where I got to be, how I got to be where I am. The most impactful thing I think that when you put all of this together in my life is that the service to the poor is truly my mission. Um, I am no longer poor, and I'm very grateful to that. But I was very, very poor crossing the border with my parents, with my brother and my parents. And my heart will always be there to have someone to help. And I do think how unjust it was to have a 10-year-old interpret during a very personal exam. You know, that doesn't happen anymore. I don't think. It certainly doesn't happen at our community clinics. So to answer your question, Protima, are you in your dream job? I am. I really am. I've been at the director, CEO of the Community Health Partnership for 10 years now. It brings everything together. It brings healthcare, it brings equity, it brings social justice, it brings the whole issue of translation and who speaks for whom, who advocates for him, for whom, but it also brings a very powerful mission of serving those that are, you know, low income. And probably 80% of our patients are new immigrants, newly arrived, just as I was when I was 10 years old.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. No.
that's my brief story.
No, thank
I
you.
gave you 68 years in 4 minutes. Thank you.
Okay, people, you can do the math now. That, you know, it's wonderful to begin from a place of reciting for us what your journey looks like for you today, where you are, and what that journey is in terms of telling other people. And that's important to me also, because I feel that there is this perception when women are trying to break barriers, break the glass ceiling, cross whatever it is that has been put in front of us to say, no, you can't. We always look around and see who's done it and how have they done it. And I hope that what we take away, what I have taken away, is each one of us here in this Hollywood squares, or as I like to call it, Bollywood squares, we've learned it differently, right? And so I really thank you for sharing that. And I want to encourage our participants to keep on giving questions. I see your questions, and we'll definitely ask those questions as we go along. But I want to now turn to Upuia and ask you a related question to what you had shared in terms of your launching of WELA, and what was it that caused you to sit back and think, wait a minute, this is what I need to do? And how is it that you want to share that particular effort in terms of what women can do as leadership roles? So please.
Oh, that's great. You know, I'm a small business owner in Los Altos and Pleasanton, and I launched Pua Body Studios, which is a massage incubator. It's designed, it's a platform to help other massage practitioners support them in their business. And that was launched in 2016. So I'm new to the entrepreneur small business world. Didn't really know a whole lot about there's so many aspects of being a business owner. You can you can know the craft, you can know the art of massage therapy. Now there's this whole world of, you know, marketing, financing, et cetera, et cetera. And I just thought, oh, I'm going to have a business in downtown Los Altos and Pleasanton, and everyone's going to come to my studio. That did not happen. So I realized that I have to kind of go knock on people's doors, and that actually was still tough as well. I, you know, approached it with emails, still tough. And again, I was struggling with figuring out how do you find connection? How do you find community within the business world, the small business world? And that's not that easy. I know there's the Chamber of Commerce, there's the downtown associations where great resources for business owners get started. And again, it was still trying to find connection. And what happened a year into launching Kuwabati, I recognized that in downtown Los Altos, there was a huge percentage of women-owned businesses. And I just felt like, wow, this has not been highlighted. We need to recognize these amazing women leaders in our community. And I bet you in every community throughout the United States, there's these, I mean, again, there's male-led businesses as well, but I just thought it was like a high percentage in downtown Los Altos. And then I looked at Pleasanton, it's like, oh, that's happening as well. So I just felt compelled to, again, this is part of my culture or just my being, is that I wanted to recognize and celebrate these women leaders in our community who have not been recognized. I mean, as a business owner, I don't think I've been part of an event that highlighted small business owners. So in 2016, with the help of other business owners, we launched Women Entrepreneurs of Los Altos, and it's grown since then. And now we've morphed and repurposed the name WELA into Women Entrepreneurs Launch, because it's now grown. We have a new chapter in Pleasanton, and it's just flourished. We had, in our first year, over 300 women entrepreneurs show up. It's like, wow. And in Los Altos, we were able to identify close to 200 women-owned businesses. So again, it was an opportunity to showcase these leaders. And in parallel, I got a chance to build all these beautiful relationships with women entrepreneurs in Los Altos and Pleasanton, and now it's growing throughout the Bay Area. So very proud of the women leaders who've helped me grow it. And we're still, just, it's all upward. So very grateful to share this with those who are on this panel and this event today.
No, and thank you so much for highlighting that sometimes we fill the gap that we see, because that's what I see your efforts have done. As well, there isn't an opportunity that comes your way neatly packaged. Sometimes we have to look around and see what is that opportunity that will help us plug our story into the bigger narrative. And I always say this, no one else should tell our story. We should tell our story. And I'm thinking about, you mentioned that there are male entrepreneurs and men-owned businesses. Guess what? That's how it's always been. And when we joined the workforce and we started to join the workforce in large numbers and then became business owners, nobody paused and said, wow, let's celebrate this group. And that's what you're doing. And then I feel like when we talk about women as leaders, those are important aspects to highlight as well, because otherwise we're letting go an opportunity that might allow somebody to pause and say, oh, I'm thinking about what Dr. Dewan said, didn't see women leaders in the business. She could have been the owner of 5 franchises or 15 businesses, who knows, right? And here you are running the county office of ed. So I want to, pivot to ask you, Dr. Dewan, in your story, the thing that I heard you say about, you looked around in the fast food industry and didn't see many women leaders, but also that when you were being asked to be a principal, you didn't see many women in that role either. And one of the things that I have read through research is that in the education sector, as far as the workforce of teachers and educators is concerned, there is a representation overwhelmingly of women. But when we start to look at the leadership levels, when we look at the county board of the education boards, we look at superintendents, we look at high administrations, we're still not seeing the equity that we need. And so I would love to hear your thoughts about what was it that you had to make sure you brought to the table, and how was it that you led as one of the few at that time in the role of a principal?
Well, I think that, that initial invitation into the leadership journey in education, was one that I resisted, I think, at first, as you mentioned, because I didn't see women successful in the principalship, and I wasn't sure, and I think a lot of us as women in all kinds of positions, sometimes we struggle with that sense of potentially being an imposter or always waiting to be ready, like preparing, thinking that we have to be ready or, have so much in place in order to accept a leadership role or to take that chance to pursue one. And so it was really the trust that I had in the person who was inviting me in, who also promised to give me opportunities to practice and, set me up in scenarios where I could lead the accountability team, where I could plan and deliver and implement programs and represent our school out in community. And so those little successes, gave me the courage and the strength to persist. And then I think ultimately it was my call to service that allowed me to persist in the leadership role and to look around and, say that this is something I could do. I think it was also the permission that was given to me that I didn't need to be a leader like all the other leaders around me, that each leader, each principal could bring to that experience their authentic self and lead in the way that was right for them. And so some of that was, the development and expression of empathy. And as we heard spoken earlier, which I think really comes to play in our work as leaders. And then I think similarly, as I was able to participate in those things, I wanted to share those opportunities with others. And so, I taught at the university, I coach, I mentor, and even to this day, I'm leading the Women's Leadership Network for educators here in Santa Clara County to invite more and more women into those leadership roles. As you noted, even in education where the majority of the workforce is women, in the leadership roles, we still struggle to get above 20%, 30% in those top leadership roles across the country. And so it does take these opportunities that we can provide to help other women experience success in the role, and that we have to support each other, because sometimes perhaps there are times when we as women don't necessarily support each other in all the ways that might be possible.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Dr. Dewan. I mean, it's very critical for us to remember that supporting each other is an important part of the growth of uplifting all women. I think about Upuia's story about how she started one WELA down in Los Altos and how it grew, how other people knocked on her door and said, we need more. And I do want to say, one of the things that I learned early on in my career, when I was the only, the few, those kinds of times, there was a choice. Do I want to be the kind of leader that everybody around me is, which mostly are cisgendered white men? Or do I want to be the kind of leader that brings my perspective, my lived experience, and my understanding to the table, right? Shirley Chisholm famously said, when they don't give you a seat at the table, bring a folding chair. And I expand that to say, when you bring that folding chair, you let everybody know, hey, by the way, the table is big enough to accommodate me. This is not a zero-sum game. If each of us are welcomed, it doesn't mean somebody else has to be asked to leave the room. And so I thank you for sharing that part of the journey as well, which is we as women need to support each other as well, because that table is big enough, not only for folding chairs, but for actual chairs for us to be part of growing something together. And so Dolores, I want to ask you a follow-up from your journey. One of the pieces that I heard loud and clear was service to the community, and the fact that you have today realized that everything in your experience in your professional world lined up to build you where you are today. I would love to hear from you a couple of instances of how in your leadership journey, there were moments where you paused and realized this going may look alone today, but I need to do this. I need to do this because this is where I find most passion and most purpose. Because that's the thing that I hear in your journey, the passion and the purpose. So I'd love to hear from you a little more about that.
Oh my goodness. I can tell you that there are more than 2 days or twice where I have had that feeling. I think, unfortunately, over the last 10 years, and probably, and certainly before that, I've had it many, many a time. My first experience with that was when I will not name titles or names, but certainly a very tall person, a very tall male, said to me, you are too quiet, and to be a good director, a good manager, you have to be able to get up and swear and scream and yell. Um, so sometimes I do swear a little bit at this point, but I don't yell. So have never learned to do that. And that was my one of the experiences that I just think so sadly about, when I remember when this was said to me, and it was in the context of, you are not going to get a promotion because of that. So I remember saying to the gentleman, may I go out the back door, because I didn't want to see people. I was crying at that point. I was so hurt and I didn't want anybody to see that. So I put on my dark glasses, went out the back door, and I got in the car and sat down and looked at myself in the mirror, and I thought, what the heck? What in the world was that? Did I get a message such as, you don't have the skills, you're always late, you're always early, you don't play well in the sandbox, none of that. It was, you are too quiet and you don't yell and scream and swear enough like the other boys do. So that's when I literally looked at my rearview mirror, and my makeup was running all over, and I said, no, no, this cannot be. This cannot be the end of my career. So that was one instance. And since then, there are many, many times where, uh, let me just put it this way. When you're in the business of advocating for a population that is not always welcomed, certainly in the last few years, it had, but that wasn't all that different. It's always been like that. Let's be honest. It's always been like that, either gender or race or ethnicity. And so when you are pegged as the person that's going to speak for that population, or that's your job, you begin to see the separation. You begin to see sometimes other women separating from you, because they don't want to be associated with that message, or advocating for, like, oh gosh, here she is again, type of thing. So if those days are very discouraging for me, and sad. And uh, growing up in San Francisco, in the early 60s, when I arrived here, and going through the entire social movement and power to the people, and the, I love you, you love me kind of thing. But really, the major civil rights movement, um, that I have to draw on that, Protima, to remember, that's okay that you're not going to speak to me in the next, for the next week. It's okay. I stand firm by what I believe and what I think needs to happen. So that's what keeps me going. Just drawing on the law, the experiences, what the civil rights movement intended to do, which includes healthcare, and signed when I was still in grammar school. Um, so there are many days like that, and I would say the last year has probably been the worst for many of us, for many reasons, right? But with COVID impacting a very specific population, you run the risk of bringing that sentiment out, that it's that population who's at risk or at fault for bringing COVID to our lovely community. So those are very, I wouldn't say disturbing, but very sad moments, which just have to draw on the past and keep me going.
Yeah.
I hope that answers your question.
No, it does. I mean, it's important. Look, I didn't want a panel where I ask each one of you the same questions, because the journeys and the challenges that each of you have as leaders is different. And so I thank you for being vulnerable and sharing with us what you just did, Dolores, because otherwise, there is this perception that you have to be a certain type of leader, the kind that swears, for example, or that's tall and not petite, like Dr. Dewan was mentioning, right? I don't believe in that, and we don't hear those stories often enough. So I really want to thank you for challenging us to remember that this is what a leader can look like as well. This is what a leader can look like as well. There isn't who died and made somebody else the king, really the king of this is what leaders look like, right? And I also want to say I don't like to use the word good and pandemic in the same sentence. But one of the things that the pandemic has done is to bring into the forefront the inequities that exist in our society. It's not that the pandemic has caused it. The pandemic has finally opened eyes. Dr. Nadine Burke Harris is the Surgeon General of California, the first person to ever be appointed in a role of that kind. And her work pioneered adverse childhood experiences, ACEs. And her writings now have started to focus on the social determinants of health. And we hope that as we grow, and we will come out of this pandemic, I promise each one of you we will, but as we do come out, that we learn these lessons and pick up the threads of the work that Community Health Partnership has been doing, or that, Dr. Dewan and your leadership with the county schools, all of the pieces that we need to connect. And I feel that this group has brought forward what it is that we bring as leaders in our community. And so what I want to do, and thank you attendees for continuing to send questions, please continue to send questions, because I'm going to ask each of our panelists now to give us their perspective on this one final piece. And this is a question for each one of you. Why is it important that our community see women as leaders? And I say community see women as leaders because this is a community issue. It's the rising tide. I do a lot of work on race equity, and everyone says, Protima, aren't you the person who's in charge of gender equity? Yes, I am. And when we look at race equity, we are looking at structural and institutional racism, the barriers that began there. If we start to dismantle those barriers, then it becomes a rising tide type of solution. And so for each one of you, what is it that you believe is important in terms of our community seeing women as leaders, and why is it important to have women as leaders? And we can start with Dolores, since you are still unmuted, and then we'll go to Dr. Dewan, and then Upuia can close us out. Dolores.
Thank you. Well, I look at it from two perspectives. One is just plain old math. 49, 51%, however you want to define it. So just an equal distribution of power. That's one way to look at it. Very simple way, but it still has a long ways to go. The other way is more around the issue of, back to my roots of multidisciplinary thinking and what I was taught at UC Berkeley and UCSF, which, by the way, I ended up working there as a graduate student, even though I had been there as a 10-year-old too, that the best way to get a comprehensive approach to anything is to bring in different minds, different perspectives, different backgrounds, people who look differently than you, people who know nothing about healthcare, all the way to Dr. Fauci, who knows everything about healthcare, to bring those folks together in those minds. So when you do that, if you truly believe that, then you have to include women. in that, because that balances the field or levels the field, however you want to say that. Different perspectives, different ethnicities. It's far more than sex and gender at this point. I think now we're really need to deal into different economic strata that needs to be represented if you truly want we the people to represent us.
Yeah, thank you, thank you. Dr. Dewan.
Just really love what Dolores shared, especially around, just the the numbers and the numbers game. And it reminds me of, something that I considered pretty early in my career, and that has framed my work with our Women's Leadership Network. And that is that we need more women in leadership positions so we can get away from the scarcity mentality. This idea that there are only a few token seats, there are only a few representative, or if we've got a few people in those seats, then, we can check that box and say that we've accomplished equity or we've accomplished diversity or inclusion. And I think the more that we're able to think universally about leadership and provide these opportunities for leadership journeys that get us closer to that balance in leadership that represents our community, that represents our population and statistics, then we have a real fighting chance to get away from that idea that they're not enough, that there aren't enough leadership positions or enough opportunities. I think there are plenty. There are, millions and millions of opportunities, and our limiting factor is our mindset and what we see when we look around us.
Thank you. And I do want to say, bringing up the whole checking a box or just enough, or that is an important piece. And imposter syndrome is a growing body of work. Call me if any of you are interested in talking about it, but I find that incredibly important to address right away, because I know I'm here because somebody recognized my talent and the tools that I bring to the table, and I will do this job as best as I can. And if it means that you think that I got this job because I'm a woman of color, I'm a foreign-born immigrant, all of those boxes, sure, and I have the talent. I always tell people, the moment you start to doubt yourself, look around and think about what you're hearing. Find somebody who can help you recognize that you got where you are because of your talent and your tenacity. And that talent and tenacity is what's important. So Upuia, tell us about what you think in terms of why our community needs to see more women in leadership roles.
Well, I want to echo what Dolores and Dr. Dewan shared, that there's so many opportunities no matter where you're at. I don't think I need to strive to be the CEO or these high, what we think leadership is. Because as I mentioned earlier, if you can learn the art of service or giving back, you've actually gotten the first step of leadership. Leadership is not just a role; it's you being able to take responsibility for what's been provided to you, what's been given to you, the task that's in front of you. So if you're able to master that at any level, as a kindergartner in your classroom, to the CEO of a company or the president of the United States, that's so valuable. But as a woman, I feel like we are redefining the word leadership. So leadership comes in all colors and shapes and whatnot. So if your goal is to become this role that we think of as the CEO or the president or the principal or whatnot, perhaps as women, we're just redefining it and showing you that there's a lot of talent as women. There's a lot of strengths, there's a lot of gifts that we bring to the table. And I want to bring that versus the traditional way of seeing leadership. So I kind of want to kind of disrupt that whole concept that we have to do it the old-fashioned way or what we're so used to. Because like for instance, with WELA or Kuwabati or Vai, I'm redefining it and I'm making it my own. But the challenge is, are you willing to take the risk Are you really willing to come and put in the effort? That's what I'm looking for as a leader. Is not so much just filling a spot in a company. That's not exciting to me. I want to see someone who's willing to make change, who's willing to disrupt the norm, and to bring something that's new and fresh. And so, as women, again, I think we have so much strength, so many amazing qualities that if you want to disrupt the world of the male race, I mean, that's our opportunity. But if there's an opportunity to showcase our strength as women, because there's so many beautiful qualities, and look what's already happening in front of us, right? So that's how I would say in terms of women leadership, not just looking at your gender, but it's like, let's see how you will take up the role of being a leader in your classroom or your home, your family, your job, etc. So I hope that helps.
Yeah, no, thank you. And it's really important to stress that we bring what we have learned and what we have as talent, and that defines our leadership. Because through the pandemic, one of the common themes that is emerging is the leadership that women are showing in getting us to manage the pandemic. Even in the county of Santa Clara, our medical officer, our board president, the leadership that they're showing is remarkable. And it's equitable and expansive. It welcomes everybody. And that is a quality that we have to remember comes when you are often left out. Because when you get to make the policy and the planning, you don't want to leave anyone out. Because you remember when you were walking the walk and everybody kept leaving you behind. Right? I think of, and really gender equity is important to stress on, because I think of what happened, even rocket scientists don't get it right. In 2019, NASA was going to do an all-women spacewalk, and they had to cancel it. The astronauts got it wrong. They didn't send enough spacesuits of different sizes. And so the women astronaut who felt that it was better for her to do the spacewalk in a small spacesuit decided she couldn't do the spacewalk in a medium-sized spacesuit. I wish I could make this stuff up, right? I'd be a great storyteller. I can't make this stuff up. The fact that Steph Curry, who has done so much for our young people, launched a shoe brand with Under Armour and didn't have a size for girls, and had to be told by a girl in the Northern California Bay Area County that she was looking for her shoe size and there wasn't in girls. I think about all of that, and that's when I realized there are gaps, and that the diversity that we bring to the table as leaders are the ways in which we'll get those gaps covered. So I'm going to move to the question and answer session. There is a comment, Dr. Dewan, your story really inspired me and touched my heart. Thank you for sharing your story. There is a question, and I invite each member to think about this answer. Your experiences emphasize the importance of lucky female mentorships. What sort of formal mentorship programs are there in the County of Santa Clara for women? As someone who manages the Office of Women's Policy, I would say that there are several different types of mentorship programs, and I would definitely encourage you to look through your industry for mentorship programs. And if you don't find any, we'll do what Upuia did, fill the gap. But I would love to turn to each one of our panelists. If you all have any specific mentorship programs that you are part of, please do share. Oh, Dr. Dewan, we can see you.
Okay, go ahead.
Go ahead.
Sorry, we'll be happy to just share briefly, in addition to the Women's Leadership Network for educators, we also have a number of school district specific coaching and mentoring or leadership development programs, as well as our Administrator of California's School Administrators Association has mentoring and coaching. But I also don't know that formal mentorship is, always necessary. And I really have, throughout my entire journey, have reached out to others and tried to build a kitchen cabinet, so to speak, of people who could advise and coach, and I could pick up the phone and call. And I think as we talk with girls and colleagues and support young women in their leadership development, to encourage them, to think that way as well, that there's a place for formal mentorship, but there's also a powerful experience through some of the informal relationships that can be built along the way.
Thank you. Dolores and then Upuia.
There are a couple of things that we're doing in my office or out of the Community Health Partnership. One is we have a very, very robust internship program, and we target college students, all the way from freshmen to seniors. Um, most of them, interesting, most of them happen to be women, though we don't say you must be a woman to be part of this training, of this internship. It just happens that way. I'm not sure why, to be honest with you. But what we've done, in addition to the didactic training and the placement in the community health centers, we also do a big sector on leadership and mentoring. So I'm very involved in that. I enjoy doing it, for one thing. And I've been able to build friendships, believe it or not, with 18-year-olds, 20-year-olds. Certainly not at the level of someone seen every weekend or anything, but talking. I call them for advice. So that's very gratifying, I think, to both of us. So that's one thing. I've also hired 3 of the young women over the years who are still with, 2 of them are still with us. Another thing that we do, I'm very clear with my staff that working in a nonprofit is wonderful, but at some point you do need to leave the nest. We're a small nonprofit, so you do need to leave. And I tell them from the very beginning, I'm going to teach you how to leave the nest. That's my, and they look at me like, you're trying to get rid of me already. You just hired me. I said, oh, no. This is going to take a while. Don't worry. That's one thing. I also really want to echo Dr. Dewan's comments, because that's been my most, I think, our most successful, being a mentor and a mentee. I mean, I still am both. And when one of the head of the clinical department of mental health in one of the clinics that I used to work said to me one day, I'd like to invite you out for coffee. We sat down and she said, okay, I lied. There's no coffee. I want to know when you're going back to graduate school. That was a perfect thing to do with me. Let's get down to business. Forget the coffee. You are going back to. So she and I had been working on some psychological studies and stuff, and the mentoring that happens. So it can happen in so many different ways.
Thank you. And Upuia, you have anything else to add?
Yeah, I think the same with the 2 ladies, is that there's different roles of different types of mentorship. And for instance, with Kuwabati Studios, we saw the need to help other young massage therapists right out of school learn the craft and get more experience. So our team actually became the mentors for these new graduates. And then the other thing that we just rolled out with the Women Entrepreneurs Launch is we created a group of 12 women. It's called Wise Women Circles. We just first launched the last 3 months. And it's a group mentorships, and then we break up into smaller groups so that we're helping each other as entrepreneurs and business owners. So it's taken off, and there's a lot of positive and amazing feedback for this. So we'll continue that. And the other thing that both of the ladies mentioned is this one-on-one. So I found that identifying someone in your industry or in the community that you really respect and you look up to and you just admire, and reach out to them, ask them, would you be willing to have coffee? And I'd love to learn your story and how you were able to navigate the world of, X, Y, and Z. So I actually took, the time to reach out to a few people that really I just admired, and they were willing to, collaborate and talk and just share. So I feel like there's
That's very nice.
variables of mentorship. And one thing I want to say is that as a young school counselor, I really admire a few of the administrators, and I just watched them that was my mentorship, was watching them. They were amazing. Amazingly, they were all women, and I love them because they were my first examples of strong women in roles of leadership. So
thank you. You actually answered the follow-up question that I was going to run with, Upuia, which is, who mentored you and who are you supporting in their leadership journey? So thank you for weaving both of those pieces. Then Dr. Dewan, do you have anything else to add to that piece? There's a question specifically on who mentored you and who you're supporting. Who are you supporting in their leadership journey?
Well, currently, I'm supporting a number of young educators and coaching and supporting them in their process. And interestingly, just today, I was to Upua's comment that a young person who's been supporting our office as an LPN reached out to me and mentioned just how I've been supporting her and asked if I would be willing to write her a letter of recommendation for her to start her RN school. And my response was, finally. So yes, so I think all of those young women leaders are the ones that I'm supporting right now.
Yeah, thank you. And then we have a following question about, before I begin reading the question, I want to say that we focus on targeted work towards gender equity. We don't focus on excluding somebody. We target raising women, girls, transgender, non-conforming individuals, because we find that that's what's lacking. But this question relates to, have any of you found that attitudes of men in leadership are changing these days to be more welcoming to women as leaders today?
I would just start to say that in my leadership journey, initially, it really was the male colleagues that I had that, expressed their invitation and their trust in what I could do. And I think largely because I was a very hard worker. And, I was the one they knew would say yes and, take on the extra workload. But even still, their support. And I do think that there's an ebb and flow to attitudes and mindsets, and just what we do in trying to support that mentality of inclusiveness, that it's not about excluding our male colleagues, it's about inclusiveness and expansion of opportunity and collaboration. And I also think that one of the ways our mindsets are shifting just as community is that we're seeing more and more opportunities around partnership and collaboration. So rather than the solo leader or the one voice of community, we're really thinking more as community, male and female alike, about shared leadership and partnership and collaboration in order to serve our community well.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. That's really important. Dolores, any comments?
Yeah, just a couple of quick comments. I've been very fortunate at starting out with my father and my dad, who still is a mentor to me, at this point. So, and his brothers, my husband, etc. So I think I've had very, very good mentors. The head of the first clinic that I worked at in East Oakland, when I went in for the interview, which was one of those interviews where you just trying to figure out what to do when you grow up interview, he said to me, I'm not sure exactly what kind of job we have for you, but I want to tell you right now that you're hired. And these are the reasons that you're hired. And they were all skill-based, etc. So I still keep in touch with him. I started working for him in 1976, and I got to know his family, etc. So very much believe in where I was going or where I thought I wanted to go, and then he offered his opportunity. But I do want to answer your question about, has there been a change? I don't know, to be honest with you, but the change I'm looking for is not in individuals, but in systems.
Yeah.
Because individuals, we all come with our own backgrounds, baggage, etc. And it's systemic where I think we need to make the changes that will force the individual to make some changes, behavior,
Yeah.
etc. Um, I do believe we've seen some big changes systematically. I
Mm.
do think though that there's a danger in us, going back a little bit if we're not careful. I think we saw it, the last few years. So that's what I want. I want
Yeah.
systemic change. I want laws that say every single board must have a 50% board of directors participation of women. I want those kind of laws, those
Mm.
kind of policies. Norway has them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you. And Upuia, you have anything to add to that?
No, I think that I'm slowly seeing change. I think
Mm.
it's an attitude. As the more we continue to have these kinds of conversations and getting in front of people and groups and opportunities, expressing and voicing our thoughts and opinions and taking up the seat or the role or the position, we will start to see change. It's a matter of time, but I'm not saying it's dramatic right now. I do think we've gotten attention, but
Yeah.
now attention versus change are two different things. So I think we're getting attention. Let's see if we can make some change.
That's perfect, because then I want to get to my next question. And since I already have you unmuted, what would you tell young women and girls who want to become leaders but don't know how?
This is for all of us, right?
For all of us.
I do think it's you don't go to school for this. It starts from if you truly want to be a leader, that you will learn, you will watch, you will serve, you will. It's not something you just you have to climb up. I think
Correct.
leader is someone you have to start. You have to know how to clean the floors.
Yes.
I mentioned earlier. I grew up, first generation. My parents landed in Hunters Point, San Francisco.
Mm.
Grew up, I'm telling you. So I grew up in Daly City. So if you have strong work ethics,
Yeah.
you're responsible, you are loyal, you have these heart, these qualities that will create this amazing leader. A good listener. It's nothing something to obtain. It's almost a quality. And as you go through life, I think you learn. I wasn't a leader in the very beginning, but it was over time that I realized that, wow, that I've come into my position. I've come into this place, or I've come into my role. And so
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. Dolores, Dr. Dewan.
Well, I will tell you that I also believe that you don't need a degree. You don't need
Mm-hmm.
to be at the top of the pyramid to
Mm-hmm.
be a leader. That leadership does not get you there. It may make you a good administrator, a good manager, no doubt. We have a leadership academy that we hold for patients of our clinics or community clinics. And in the first class, I say to them, the fact that you signed up for this,
Mm-hmm.
you are already a leader. Just the fact that you have that las ganas, that desire to be who you are. And sure enough, you go to their neighborhood, they're running the show, for their neighborhood. It's already happening. What they're missing, it sounds like the Wizard of Oz, right? What they're missing is, so, I just got this visual, is another group that they see as a bona fide leadership group to say to them, you are a leader. you know, and then I'm going to assist you into becoming perhaps a better one with more information, more skills, but you are a leader. And I do believe that comes from the family.
Mhm,
If you ask
mhm.
the owner of Nordstrom, how do you get these incredible employees? The answer is we didn't get them. We didn't form them. Their families did.
Thank you. And Dr. Dewan.
But this is before he died. Yeah.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I think a few things that I would say, just from a practical standpoint, for young girls, is something I did as a young child. And I worked at the library, as I mentioned, for my first job. But I read a lot of biographies, and I loved learning about the strength and power and resilience, and
Mhm,
perseverance. And I have to say, there were times, many, many, many times in my life when things seemed insurmountable, or I didn't know what the next step was. And I could rely back on this reality that there were many people who came before me who experienced significant challenges, and read their leadership journey or their life story and knew that there was a, a place on the other side, and that they were able to persevere or develop character, or some other sense. So one, I think learning about other people, is a powerful tool for young leaders. And then looking for opportunities, sign up, participate, um, you know, serve, participate in public service. We did a number, as you mentioned, Youth Voice Live experiences this past year, and I think all of those are opportunities for young girls to also start, because really it is a journey, and it
mhm.
starts wherever you decide to start.
Yeah, yeah, no, thank you. And to me, I'm reminded of the words of Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie when she said, "Because you're a girl is never a good answer to anything." And I always begin from there. Like if you are a girl looking for a leadership journey, you're welcome. Let's make that journey, right? And thank you for mentioning biographies. I think that one of the pieces around you can't be it if you can't see it is looking around and finding inspiration. And I know myself that I have found inspiration by reading, by talking to people, and I believe that this has to begin really early. And so I'm grateful that we have a, a mix of business professionals, educators, healthcare in this forum, because remembering that every little thing counts in the way we make our journey moving forward. And I do want to say, at the end of the day, there isn't a particular perfect sauce formula, whatever, right? The follow up to this question is, how can you encourage girls and young women on their own path towards leadership? And I would definitely say for us, where we are today, I think making sure that we tell our story and we say, one of the things that I do is I go to career days. I never turn down a request to speak at a career day. Even when I was a practicing lawyer, I would participate because they don't see lawyers who look like me, who bring the experience that I do. And I would say I would often get asked, and it's incredible that if I think back, every time this question has been asked, it's always a girl student who would ask, how do you balance practice of law um, and your family? And my first response to that is always, I hope that when you decide to practice law or go into your whatever profession it is, that you don't need to ask that question, because it is on people like us where we are today to dismantle that myth that we have to balance. There isn't such a thing. And I feel like with leadership, it's the same thing. Encouraging girls and women, young women in their own path towards leadership begins by how do we talk the talk? And at Office of Women's Policy, one of the things that we've done in the last 7 years consistently is our Girls Advisory Team Leadership Program. That leadership program recruits high school girls throughout the county of Santa Clara, and we train them for 10 months on different pieces that impact gender equity and leadership. And it culminates in a Strong Girls, Strong Women conference in the month of March. All of the conference information, documents, panel, sessions, workshops, everything is designed by our Girls Advisory Team members, right? Giving ownership then to say, okay, you learned about leadership, now you lead. And I'm so proud to say that every year they blow us away, including the pandemic year. We were getting ready to have our Strong Girls, Strong Women conference on the 21st of March, and we were sheltered, so we couldn't have it. The girls helped us redesign it, and we did a series of 3 evening, 1-hour Zoom webinars on wellness, pandemic fatigue, and pandemic successes for school girls. It was, to me, a window into how this isn't a prepackaged formula that we roll out and everyone starts to run with it. And I definitely believe that from each of your experiences, as we've heard today, that we can continue to remember that this is a journey, that throughout our journey, whatever we learn adds to our toolbox. I don't want to use the word arsenal, that sounds very violent, but to our toolbox. And then remembering the mentorship conversation, we open up our toolbox and say, I want to welcome you. What is it from here that I can share with you? Because somebody, to me, though, the journey that I've had, I've not had any mentors, but I can tell you I've had people who've believed in me. Much like the principal who told you, Dr. Dewan, why don't you go to leadership school? There have been people who've turned to me and said, I think you can do this, Protima. And the only question that I learned to ask is, if I'm not able to, can I turn to you for help? Because the people who trust you, the people who want to prop you up, are also the people you should turn to say, can you guide me in my journey if I stumble, if I pause, if I'm about to fall, if I fall, because I will. And when I do, I'll get up, I will brush my knees off and say, okay, I'm ready to walk again. Because that is in essence what I look at leadership. And so in closing, I would love to ask each of you to share. I attended this wellness workshop, and so Upuia, you'll appreciate, where I was asked to put my palms up towards the sky and think of a woman leader from history or a woman leader in my family that inspired me in my leadership journey. And to me, the woman leader in my family that comes to mind immediately is my late maternal grandmother, who never had a formal education in her entire life, never left her little North Indian rural village. When she found out that I was a lawyer, the first question she asked me was, when are you becoming a judge? For a woman who has never seen formal education to have that dream for me, that is what keeps me going every day. And so if you could close us out on any woman from history or someone in your family that has inspired you on your leadership journey.
Go ahead.
There's no question in my mind. It's my maternal grandmother. There's absolutely no question. Widowed at age 35, by then had 13 children, did not remarry, lived in Mexico with no financial aid, et cetera, long, beautiful, very sad story. And when she came to the United States, what she said to me, what can I do to help you go to school? Do you need money? What do you need from me? That was the thing. But the strength that led her to end in the 80s, she testified at the U.S. My gosh, I got emotional listening to you, Protima, at the state capitol. Because at the time there were some cuts to senior services and she was already living in senior housing. And this little tiny woman, honestly, 5 feet tall, did not speak English, had never been to school, but self-taught, actually testified at the Capitol how does that happen?
Yeah.
After giving birth to 13 children by the time she was 35, and being a widowed at that point,
Yeah.
becoming a widow. How does that happen? And I admired her. And like someone said earlier, I would watch her. I would watch her walk. I would, look at what she was wearing. How did she do this? She is I pray to her every night. I'll tell you honestly. In those days when I'm having a terrible, terrible day, like, it didn't stop her. Why should it stop me at this point, right? I've only had 2 children.
Thank you. Thank you. Upuia, you were about to share.
I was just going to share very similar to Dolores is that my paternal grandmother, who I am named after, and her name is Upuia. She, born and raised in the island of Samoa, her sister passed away, and at the time she had 5 children. And when her sister passed away, her sister had about 9 children. So she ended up taking on and adopting, in a sense, these 9 children, raising them, and one was obviously my dad. And she was the village healer. And little did I know in time that I would actually follow in her path as a massage therapist and as a healer and as a practitioner. So I'm grateful to her that when I'm named after her, I'm following in her footsteps and being able to give back to, again, how she did. She served, she gave, she led. She was a strong woman. She was tiny, but don't mess around with her.
That's the theme today. Dr. Dewan, close us out.
Thank you. So I'm going to stick with the theme, and it was also my maternal grandmother when I think about in my family who inspired me and influenced me, and I take away from my experiences with her about the magic of moments and that words matter. And as my grandmother, she believed in me, and she counteracted some of the negative mantras that permeated community at that time, especially about what girls could and couldn't do. And she did not have more than a 6th grade education. But one of the ways that she inspired me was the way that she supported her daughter who had Down syndrome and was not allowed to go to school, and whose community tried to force her into institutionalizing her daughter. And she fought against that, and she insisted that the local public school enroll her daughter in the 50s, before IDEA, before anything was available. And my aunt went to kindergarten, I think 4 years in a row. And also they told her that my aunt would not live to be beyond age 18, that she would die before 18. And my aunt is still alive today, 66 years old, and brings love and joy to our lives, and is part of the reason I started my career as a teacher of students with disabilities.
There you go. There's no better note to end on. I am grateful to each one of you. I'm grateful to Dr. Amy Ellison for having invited us to come together in this way. I'm grateful to the museum for creating this space. And I thank each one of you who spend an evening with us learning about the amazing journey of these strong women leaders, and hope that you will continue joining us in our journeys forward. Dr. Ellison.
Oh my gosh. Thank you all so much. I teared up a number of times. I'm on the verge right now. This is such an amazing conversation. I was just thinking about it's exactly what we need this year. If this is the last webinar that you take of 2020, we couldn't have ended on a better note. So thank you all so much for such an amazing conversation. And thank you to all of our attendees for tuning in. And we hope that all of you have happy holidays and stay safe. Be safe, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Good night.
Good night, everybody.